Hi there, and welcome to this short case study highlighting the issues when a currency is pegged to one another, and the reasons for doing so, and the reasons by ending the peg. And this case was dubbed in the media in early 2015 as Francageddon, when overnight the Swiss franc gained 30% in value against the euro. And I've dubbed this case study called When the Waltz Goes Wrong, and this is because I suggest that having a pegged currency is like a waltz. When you're pegged to a currency, if that currency moves, you have to move with it. You have to react. If the dance partner goes backwards, you must step forward to follow them, or it just won't work. And this is the case of the Swiss franc against the euro. So, short history. In early 2011, the Swiss franc became very expensive compared to the dollar and the euro. And this is because of the likes of the Greek sovereign debt crisis and other nervousness around the eurozone of other countries such as Spain and Portugal. And there was a lot of fears about the euro currency itself and the fact that a member state could even leave the currency due to their own economic situation. So investors were rather nervous about this, and they were really going to the safe haven of the Swiss franc. So everyone was really investing in Swiss products, Swiss securities, and so on. And because everyone was flooding into Switzerland, they were selling out of the likes of the dollar and the euro and buying Swiss francs. So ultimately, pushing up the value of the Swiss franc. And then in mid-2011, Swiss companies were starting to give a few economic warnings and saying that because the Swiss currency was so high, other companies outside Switzerland were not dealing with them. And obviously Swiss being landlocked and relied on its European neighbours, they were really worried about its exports. Obviously imports, however, were obviously rather cheap, but the companies couldn't export to the Eurozone because their products were becoming more expensive. And then they were potentially threatening to leave Switzerland and set up subsidiaries in mainland Europe under the euro currency. So then in late 2011, the Swiss National Bank tried to increase money supply of the Swiss franc to try and bring the value down. That had some sort of immediate effect to lower the currency, but it didn't work. So later that year, the Swiss Central Bank decided to peg its currency against the euro at a rate of €1 equals 120 Swiss francs. And this is obviously to help exporters to have price certainty with the fact that the Swiss franc kept going up and up and up. So let's look at early July in the summer of 2011. You can see here with the base currency being the US dollar, how overvalued the Swiss franc was, according to the purchasing power parity theory, over the US dollar, but also compare that with the overvalue of the euro. And if you remember at the time, the US dollar was also struggling, hence why everyone was potentially putting their money in Swiss francs, selling dollars and euros to buy Swiss franc. So you can see how overvalued the Swiss franc was at the time. And if we look at a timeline of the price of the Swiss franc against the euro, so this is 1 Swiss franc buys X euros, you can see certainly in 2010 and 2011 how much value the Swiss franc was getting. It was increasing in value up until a point where the Swiss franc was nearly 1 Swiss franc was nearly worth €1. And this is where they put some money supply in, as I mentioned, increased money supply of the Swiss franc, which brought the currency down. But again, we still seen it didn't bring down all the way. And that's when they decided to peg 120 Swiss francs to €1. Or if we look at the more indirect quotation, 1 Swiss franc to about 83 euro cents. So when they pegged it, you can see how stable the peg was. Of course, the Central Bank of Switzerland had to do something to maintain this peg as the euro changed in value. But this was the problem. The euro was continuing to change in value. During the whole period, the euro currency was still sliding in value. There was still a lot of economic nervousness throughout the eurozone, again with the likes of the Greek default potential, Portugal, Spain, and quite a lot just of economic issues in the eurozone, which you may have read about during this period. So the Swiss franc was being artificially lowered in line with the euro. So in order to do that, what does the Swiss central bank have to do? Well, it has to buy in euros. So if the euros are sliding, the way to potentially increase the value of the euro is to keep buying euros, contracting supply of euros as the Swiss franc sits with them. So if they reduce the supply of euros by buying it all in, hopefully that will push up the value of the euro again. However, it wasn't working out as planned. This euro still continued to slide. So the Swiss central bank was buying in all these euros, very expensive to keep buying foreign exchange. But worst of all, the euros were sliding in value. So you kept buying euros, but they kept falling because of wider international speculation against the euro. So essentially the Swiss franc was holding a lot of euros that was falling in value. So holding quite an expensive loss potentially. And it got until a point in January of 2015 where without warning the Swiss central bank just had to abandon this cap. It was getting too expensive to artificially lower the Swiss franc's currency in line with the euro. And without warning they did that, and it really resulted in a bit of financial market turmoil. The Swiss central bank action resulted in the Swiss franc increasing in value by about 30% in a minute against the euro. Because the Swiss franc became floating again and priced correctly on the floating exchange, the Swiss franc substantially increased. As well as doing this, the Swiss National Bank also lowered its interest rate to negative 0.75. In other words, don't buy Swiss debt products or don't save in Swiss bank accounts because it will cost you. Use that money to invest. But obviously doing such an action, making the Swiss being 30% more expensive than it was yesterday for its European neighbours, does have consequences to the exporters. All of a sudden, exporters' goods were not capped to the euro anymore. They were now 30% more expensive overnight. And as you can see on the chart, it's really a steep increase. 1 Swiss franc used to buy you less than 85 cents, but pretty much went up. The Swiss franc is €1 instantly. And if you can see, again, if we look at the purchasing power parity, you can see against the dollar that the Swiss franc, following this, again, was severely overvalued compared to the US dollar and the likes of the euro. But obviously doing this sort of action, where the value of the franc went up so rapidly, well, what did that do to the economy? Well, the Swiss stock exchange had this sort of reaction, a very steep decline. And this is because there was nervousness about the fact that, oh no one's going to buy our Swiss company goods anymore because they can't afford them. This was also reflected in one of their major companies, Swatch Watches. But obviously it didn't end there. It wasn't just about Swiss companies on stock exchange. The likes of the countries around Switzerland were actually putting on buses, sending them into Switzerland to pick up Swiss people, drive them into their countries so they could buy products which were all of a sudden 30% cheaper. So people were hopping out of Switzerland, buying lots of shopping, lots of goods, lots of large ticket items and taking them back into Switzerland. So quite a lot of domestic companies were suffering because no one was buying from them and just hopping over the border to go into the neighbour countries to do so. So not only did it hit the big companies, thinking, oh no, our profits are going to be hit here because no one's going to buy, it was also hurting domestic smaller companies. And certainly in the hospitality sector, this hit really hard because think of the timing. This was in January, peak skiing season time. If people didn't book their hotel and were waiting to pay on arrival, then if they'll come from mainland Europe that use the euro, then that hotel is going to cost people 30% more. So there's a lot of hotel cancellations because people hadn't paid for them and they weren't certainly going to pay 30% more because of this action by the Swiss central bank. As well as that, there was a number of foreign exchange trading companies that went bankrupt overnight because they didn't have the liquidity positions to hold this substantial increase in the Swiss franc. So this company here which is based in New Zealand, I believe. Alpari Foreign Exchange, excellently modelled by Andy Carroll, now a Newcastle player at the time of recording. That company at the time was still sponsoring West Ham, but they went bust because of liquidity problems. And they obviously cited this: exceptional volatility and extreme lack of liquidity caused this. For more information, do have a read up on this case. This BBC link takes you to the news article at the time, and quite a lot of the commentators and Swiss population were very angry at the Swiss central bank for unpegging without any warning. So do have a look at that and other articles related to this. Thank you for watching.